Maria Santos had always been careful about her evening runs through the downtown district. As a journalist covering corruption in local government, she knew she had made enemies. But on this particular Tuesday night in March, her usual caution wasn't enough. She was jogging past the old warehouse district when the black van pulled up beside her. 3 men jumped out before she could react. They grabbed her arms and dragged her into the vehicle despite her struggles and screams. The van's doors slammed shut, and her world went dark as someone pressed a cloth over her face. When Maria woke up, she found herself in a dimly lit basement room. Her hands were tied behind her back and her ankles were bound to the metal chair she sat in. The room smelled of dampness and motor oil. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows on the concrete walls. The door creaked open and a tall man in an expensive suit walked in. Behind him followed 2 others, one muscular with tattoos covering his arms, the other thin and nervous-looking. The man in the suit introduced himself as Vincent Romano, someone Maria recognized from her investigations into the city's underground operations. "Miss Santos," Vincent said with a cold smile, "you've been asking too many questions about our business. We thought it was time for a conversation." He pulled up a chair and sat across from her. "You see, your little newspaper articles have been causing us some trouble with certain city officials who prefer to keep things quiet." Maria's mind raced as she listened. She had been working on a story about money laundering through construction contracts, and Vincent's name had appeared in several documents she'd obtained. Now she understood why they had taken her. "What do you want?" Maria asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Vincent leaned forward. "We want you to stop writing. Forget everything you think you know about our operations. Find a new beat to cover, maybe sports or local festivals. Something safe." The muscular man who Vincent called Tony cracked his knuckles loudly. "And if she doesn't want to cooperate?" he asked with a menacing grin. Vincent's expression remained calm, but his eyes turned cold. "Then Miss Santos will discover that some stories are too dangerous to tell. We'll keep her here until she sees reason, however long that takes." Maria realized she was in serious trouble. These weren't just small-time criminals. They were organized, professional, and clearly willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. She needed to think fast if she was going to survive this situation. The thin man, introduced as Eddie, seemed uncomfortable with the whole situation. He kept glancing nervously between Vincent and Maria, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Maria filed this observation away. Perhaps Eddie could be her weak link. "I need time to think," Maria said finally. Vincent stood up and straightened his tie. "Of course."
"Take all the time you need."
"We're in no hurry." He gestured to Tony and Eddie. "These gentlemen will make sure you're comfortable while you consider our generous offer." As the 3 men left the room, Maria heard multiple locks clicking into place. She was alone now, but she could hear movement upstairs. Footsteps, muffled conversations, the sound of a television. There were definitely more people in this building than just her 3 captors. Maria tested her restraints carefully. The rope around her wrists was tight but not impossible to work with. Her journalism background had required her to learn various skills for investigative work, including some basic escape techniques from a security consultant who'd trained reporters working in dangerous areas. She began working on loosening the knots, moving slowly and quietly so as not to alert anyone upstairs. As she worked, she mentally cataloged everything she'd observed about her captors and surroundings. Vincent was clearly the leader, intelligent, controlled, and dangerous. Tony was the muscle, quick to violence, but possibly not the brightest. Eddie seemed reluctant and nervous, which could be useful. The basement had one door, but she'd noticed a small window near the ceiling that might be large enough to crawl through if she could reach it. The walls were concrete, making noise travel easily, so any escape attempt would need to be carefully timed. Hours passed as Maria worked on her restraints and planned her next moves. She could hear the men upstairs talking, watching television, moving around. Sometimes footsteps approached the basement door, and she would quickly resume her helpless posture. By dawn, she had managed to loosen the ropes around her wrists significantly. She wasn't free yet, but she was making progress. More importantly, she was beginning to form a plan that went beyond simple escape. These men had made a serious mistake in underestimating her, and she intended to make them pay for it. The second day of Maria's captivity began with Eddie bringing her a tray of food. Unlike Tony's aggressive manner or Vincent's cold professionalism, Eddie seemed genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. His hands shook slightly as he set down the tray of bread and water. "I'm sorry about all this," Eddie whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. "Vincent says it's just business, but I don't like keeping people locked up." Maria saw her opportunity. "Eddie, right? You seem like a decent person. This isn't who you really are, is it?" Eddie's face flushed red. "I owe Vincent money. A lot of money. This is the only way I can work it off." He looked around the basement nervously. "But I never signed up for kidnapping reporters. What if I told you there was another way?" Maria asked softly. "A way that could get you out from under Vincent's control and maybe even protect you from what's coming?" Before Eddie could respond, heavy footsteps echoed down the stairs. Tony appeared in the doorway, his bulky frame filling the entrance. "Eddie, what's taking so long? Just give her the food and get back upstairs." Eddie quickly set the tray down and hurried past Tony without making eye contact. But Maria had seen something in his expression, a flicker of hope, of possibility. She had planted a seed, and now she needed to be patient and let it grow. That afternoon, Vincent returned for another conversation. This time he brought a newspaper with him, her own newspaper. On the front page was a story about her disappearance, complete with her photo and quotes from the police chief about the ongoing investigation. "Your colleagues are worried about you," Vincent said, spreading the newspaper on the small table near her chair. "The police are asking questions, interviewing people in the neighborhood where you disappeared. They're taking this very seriously." Maria felt a surge of hope mixed with concern. She was glad people were looking for her, but she also worried about what Vincent might do if he felt too much pressure from law enforcement. "This attention is unfortunate," Vincent continued. "It makes our situation more complicated. We may need to move you to a different location soon. Or you could just let me go," Maria suggested. "I could tell them I went away for a few days to clear my head. People would understand. Journalists sometimes need breaks from stressful stories." Vincent laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm afraid it's too late for simple solutions, Miss Santos. You've seen our faces, you know where we operate. We can't just release you and hope for the best." The implication was clear, and Maria felt a chill run down her spine. They weren't planning to let her go at all. This was either going to end with her agreeing to stop her investigation permanently, or with them ensuring she could never write another story again. That evening, after Vincent and Tony had gone out on what Eddie called business, Maria made her move. She had been working on her restraints for 2 days now, and had finally managed to loosen them enough to slip one hand free. Working quickly but quietly, she untied her other hand and then her ankles. Her muscles were stiff from sitting in the chair for so long, but adrenaline gave her the strength she needed. She crept to the door and listened carefully. She could hear Eddie moving around upstairs, but his footsteps suggested he was in the kitchen, away from the basement entrance. The door was locked, but Maria had noticed that the basement window, though small and high up, wasn't barred. If she could stack some of the old boxes and equipment in the corner, she might be able to reach it. Moving as silently as possible, she began building a makeshift ladder from the debris in the basement. Old paint cans, cardboard boxes, and a broken wooden chair became her stepping stones to freedom. Each movement had to be calculated and quiet. One wrong sound would bring Eddie running. As she worked, she could hear Eddie talking on the phone upstairs. His voice was agitated, worried. She caught fragments of the conversation. "Getting too much attention and maybe we should just, Vincent's going to be angry." Maria realized that Eddie was as trapped in this situation as she was, just in a different way. Vincent clearly controlled him through debt and fear, and Eddie was beginning to understand that this situation was spiraling beyond anything he had agreed to be part of. Finally, her makeshift ladder was complete. Testing each step carefully, she climbed toward the narrow window. It was even smaller than she had hoped, and she wasn't sure she would fit through it, but she had to try. The window opened with a soft creak that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet basement. Maria froze, listening for any indication that Eddie had heard. The conversation upstairs continued. He was still distracted by his phone call, squeezing through the window. Required her to exhale completely and twist her body in ways that scraped her back and arms against the rough concrete. But desperation gave her the flexibility she needed, and finally she was through, tumbling onto the cold ground outside. She found herself in a narrow alley behind what appeared to be an auto repair shop. The building was isolated, surrounded by other industrial buildings that looked abandoned. It was nearly midnight and the streets were empty. Maria's first instinct was to run as far and as fast as possible, but then she stopped. Simply escaping wasn't enough anymore. These men had kidnapped her, threatened her life, and were clearly involved in serious criminal activities that went far beyond what she had originally been investigating. She pulled out her phone, which miraculously still had battery power, and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of calling the police immediately, she called her editor at the newspaper. "Sarah, it's Maria. I need you to listen carefully and don't ask questions right now. I'm safe, but I need you to start documenting everything I'm about to tell you." Maria spent the next hour hiding in an abandoned building 3 blocks away, dictating everything she could remember to her editor, Sarah. Every detail about Vincent, Tony, Eddie, the warehouse location, the conversations she'd overheard. Everything was carefully documented and backed up to multiple secure servers. "Maria, we need to call the police right now," Sarah insisted over the phone. "These people are dangerous and you're still not safe." "Not yet," Maria replied, watching the empty street through a broken window. "If we bring in the police now, Vincent and his people will just disappear. They'll destroy evidence, relocate their operation, and continue their criminal activities somewhere else. We have a chance to do something bigger here." Maria's plan was risky but thorough, rather than simply escape and hope for justice later. She intended to gather enough evidence to bring down Vincent's entire operation. Her 2 days in captivity had given her valuable intelligence about their methods, their relationships, and most importantly, their weaknesses. The first weakness was Eddie. His reluctance and guilt made him a potential ally, and Maria believed she could convince him to cooperate. The second was their overconfidence. They had underestimated her abilities and determination. The third was their assumption that she would simply run away and hide once she escaped. Over the next several hours, Maria implemented the first phase of her plan. Using her investigative skills and contacts, she researched everything she could find about Vincent Romano and his associates. Property records, business licenses, court documents. She built a comprehensive picture of their legitimate and illegitimate operations. By dawn, she had identified 3 key locations associated with Vincent's organization: the warehouse where she'd been held, an auto repair shop that appeared to be a front for money laundering, and a restaurant downtown that seemed to be their unofficial headquarters. Most importantly, she had discovered that Vincent had a pattern of using intimidation and violence against people who threatened his business interests. Maria wasn't his first victim. Over the past 2 years, at least 4 other journalists, a city council member, and 2 business owners had reported similar threats or suspicious incidents after investigating or opposing projects connected to Vincent's companies. Maria realized she was dealing with a sophisticated, criminal organization that had been operating with impunity for years. Local law enforcement either didn't understand the scope of the problem or had been unable to gather sufficient evidence to take action. The second phase of her plan required her to do something that went against every survival instinct she had. She needed to go back. That afternoon, Maria positioned herself near the warehouse where she'd been held captive. She had purchased a small digital camera and recording equipment, and she planned to document everything she could about the operation. More importantly, she hoped to make contact with Eddie when he was alone. Her opportunity came when Eddie left the warehouse to buy food from a nearby convenience store. Maria approached him carefully, staying in public view but speaking quietly. "Eddie, I need to talk to you." Eddie nearly dropped his groceries when he saw her. His face went pale and he looked around frantically. "Maria, how did you—" "Vincent's going to kill me when he finds out you escaped. He thinks I helped you." "That's exactly why you need to listen to me," Maria said urgently. "Vincent is going to blame you for my escape no matter what really happened. You're in danger now, too." Eddie's hands were shaking as he clutched the grocery bags. "What am I supposed to do? I can't run from Vincent. He has connections everywhere, and I still owe him money." "I can help you," Maria said, "but I need you to help me first. I need information about Vincent's operation. Records, names, locations. In exchange, I can offer you protection through the federal authorities and help clearing your debt through legal means." Eddie looked around nervously. "I can't talk here. Vincent has people watching everything." "Then we need to be smart about it," Maria replied. Tonight, when Vincent and Tony leave for their evening business meeting, call this number. She handed him a piece of paper with a secure phone number that Sarah had set up. We'll arrange a safe way to meet. What if this is a trap? Eddie asked. What if you're working with the police and trying to set me up? Maria understood his paranoia. Eddie, if I were working with the police, would I be standing here talking to you instead of having them arrest you right now? I escaped from that basement on my own, and I'm choosing to trust you because I believe you're not like Vincent and Tony. You got in over your head, but you're not a bad person. Eddie stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but if Vincent finds out about this before tonight, we're both dead. As Eddie walked back toward the warehouse, Maria felt a mixture of hope and terror. She was committed now to a course of action that would either bring down a dangerous criminal organization or get her killed. There was no middle ground. That evening, Maria waited in a secure location that Sarah had arranged, a safe house used by the newspaper for protecting sources in dangerous investigations. Her phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. It's Eddie, came the nervous voice. They left an hour ago. Vincent said they wouldn't be back until late tomorrow, but I don't know how much time we have. Can you get to Vincent's office in the warehouse? Maria asked. Yes, but it's locked. Do you know where he keeps important documents? Financial records, contact lists, anything that might be evidence of illegal activities? There was a pause. He has a safe in his office and he keeps files in his desk. But I don't know the combination to the safe. The desk files will do, Maria said. Can you photograph them with your phone? I guess so. But what if he finds out they've been disturbed? Be very careful to put everything back exactly as you found it. Take pictures of each document and then email them to the secure address I'm going to give you. For the next 2 hours, Eddie sent Maria dozens of photographs documenting Vincent's criminal enterprise. Financial records showing money laundering through construction projects, lists of public officials receiving illegal payments, records of intimidation tactics used against business competitors. It was everything Maria needed to build a comprehensive case against the organization. More importantly, the documents revealed that Vincent's operation was much larger than she had initially suspected. He wasn't just involved in local corruption. He was part of a regional network that included connections to organized crime families in 3 different states. Armed with Eddie's photographs and her own investigative work, Maria spent the next 3 days building an airtight case against Vincent's organization. She worked from the safe house using encrypted communications and secure databases to verify the information Eddie had provided. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering. Vincent's organization had corrupted city planning processes, manipulated construction bids, laundered money through dozens of legitimate businesses, and systematically intimidated anyone who threatened their operations. The financial records showed millions of dollars moving through fake transactions and shell companies. Most disturbing were the personal files Vincent kept on his targets. Maria found detailed surveillance reports on herself dating back 6 months, including her daily routines, her family members' addresses, and even photographs taken without her knowledge. She wasn't his only target. There were similar files on 12 other people, including 2 other journalists, several business owners, and a city council member who had voted against projects connected to Vincent's companies. This is bigger than anything we've handled before, Sarah told Maria during one of their secure phone calls. We need to involve federal authorities immediately. This isn't just local corruption. It's organized crime with interstate connections. Maria agreed, but she also knew that once they brought in federal agents, her opportunity for direct action would end. She would become a protected witness, valuable only for her testimony. Vincent, Tony, and their associates would be arrested, but there were others in the organization who might escape justice if the investigation moved too quickly. Give me 1 more day, Maria requested. Eddie is still gathering information, and I think there's something bigger happening tomorrow night. Vincent mentioned a major meeting with out-of-state associates. That evening, Eddie called with urgent news. Vincent's boss is coming to town tomorrow night. Someone named Carlucci from Philadelphia. They're meeting at the restaurant downtown to discuss expanding their territory into the southern part of the state. Maria felt her pulse quicken. If Vincent's superior was attending this meeting, it represented an opportunity to capture evidence of the broader criminal network. Can you find out more details about the meeting? I'm supposed to help with security, Eddie said. Vincent wants me and Tony to watch the parking area and make sure no one is taking pictures or recording anything. But Maria, I'm getting scared. If they figure out what I've been doing, we're almost finished, Maria assured him. After tomorrow night, you'll be safe. I promise. But Maria was planning something that would put both her and Eddie in considerably more danger than he realized. She intended to record the meeting between Vincent and Carlucci, and to do that, she would need to get inside the restaurant while the meeting was taking place. The next day, Maria conducted detailed surveillance of the restaurant. Romano's Kitchen was a small Italian place in the downtown district, owned by Vincent's cousin according to the business records. The building was old but well-maintained, with a main dining room, a private back room for special events, and a kitchen that connected to both areas. Maria noticed that the restaurant had a delivery entrance in the rear alley that was separate from the main entrance. More importantly, there was a ventilation system that connected the private dining room to the basement, where the restaurant stored wine and supplies. Working with Sarah, Maria developed a plan that was dangerous but feasible. She would enter through the delivery entrance during the dinner rush. When the kitchen staff would be too busy to notice an extra person, she would hide in the basement storage area and use the ventilation system to record the meeting between Vincent and Carlucci. This is insane, Sarah told her. If they catch you, they'll kill you immediately. These aren't people who give second chances. If we don't get evidence of this meeting, Carlucci will disappear back to Philadelphia, and we'll lose our chance to connect Vincent to the larger organization, Maria replied. Eddie's testimony will be enough to convict Vincent of local crimes, but it won't touch the broader network. That evening, Maria put her plan into action. Dressed as a food delivery driver, she entered Romano's Kitchen through the rear entrance during the busiest part of the dinner service. The kitchen was chaotic, with servers rushing in and out, cooks shouting orders, and steam rising from multiple stoves and ovens. No one paid attention to another person in a delivery uniform walking through the kitchen. Maria located the basement stairs and slipped downstairs while the staff was distracted by a particularly large order. The basement was dark and cramped, filled with wine racks and food storage containers. More importantly, she could hear voices from the private dining room directly above her through the old building's ventilation system. Maria set up her recording equipment and settled in to wait. The meeting was scheduled to begin at 9 o'clock, and she could hear Vincent's voice as he prepared the room and tested the sound system they planned to use for their presentation. At exactly 9 o'clock, new voices joined the conversation. Maria recognized Vincent's greeting to someone he addressed as Mr. Carlucci. The conversation began with pleasantries about travel and mutual acquaintances, but quickly moved to business matters. What Maria heard over the next 2 hours exceeded her worst expectations about the scope of the criminal organization. Vincent's local operation was just one small part of a network that extended throughout the eastern United States. They discussed territories, profit-sharing arrangements, methods for corrupting public officials, and plans for eliminating competition through intimidation and violence. Most chilling was their casual discussion of people who had caused them problems. Maria heard her own name mentioned, along with the names of other journalists and investigators who had been dealt with in various ways. Some had been intimidated into silence, others had been discredited through planted evidence or false accusations, and a few had simply disappeared. The Santos woman is still a problem, Vincent reported. She escaped somehow and now she's underground. My sources in the police department tell me they're treating her disappearance as a kidnapping case, but they don't have any solid leads. Carlucci's response made Maria's blood run cold. Then we need to find her before she becomes a bigger problem. Use whatever resources you need. Check her family, her friends, her colleagues. Someone knows where she is. What about the federal investigation? Vincent asked. My contact in the mayor's office says there are rumors about FBI interest in our construction projects. Let me worry about federal problems, Carlucci replied. I have people who can slow down investigations when necessary. Your job is to keep your local operation clean and find the Santos woman. Maria continued recording as they discussed specific plans for expanding their territory, corrupting additional public officials and eliminating competitors. The detail was extraordinary. Names, dates, amounts of money, specific criminal acts that had been committed and were planned for the future. By 11 o'clock, the meeting was winding down. Maria had recorded enough evidence to destroy not just Vincent's local operation, but potentially the entire regional network. Now she needed to escape without being detected. Getting out of the restaurant proved more difficult than getting in. The dinner rush had ended, and the kitchen staff had thinned out considerably. Maria could hear Vincent and his guests moving around upstairs, and she knew that Tony and Eddie were stationed outside watching for any suspicious activity. She waited in the basement for nearly an hour, listening to the sounds above. Finally, she heard the front door of the restaurant opening and closing several times as Carlucci and his associates left. Vincent's voice grew fainter as he walked them outside, probably to their cars. This was her chance. Maria packed up her recording equipment and crept toward the basement stairs. She could hear Vincent talking to someone on his phone in the front of the restaurant, but his voice was distant enough that she felt safe moving through the kitchen area. The rear delivery entrance was only 30 feet away, but those 30 feet felt like 30 miles. Every step seemed impossibly loud. Every shadow looked like a potential hiding place for one of Vincent's men. Maria forced herself to move slowly and deliberately, avoiding the areas where the wooden floor creaked. She was almost to the door when she heard footsteps in the alley outside. Someone was approaching the rear entrance, and she was trapped between them and Vincent's voice coming from the front of the restaurant. Thinking quickly, Maria ducked behind a large commercial refrigerator just as the rear door opened. Eddie's voice called out softly, "Maria? Are you in there? Vincent sent me to check the back area before we lock up." Maria realized this might be her only chance to communicate with Eddie before everything came to a head. She whispered from behind the refrigerator, "Eddie, it's me. Don't react. Just listen." Eddie's intake of breath was sharp, but he managed to keep his voice level. "Where are you?" "Behind the refrigerator." "Eddie, I recorded the entire meeting. I have evidence that will bring down not just Vincent, but his entire organization. But I need your help to get out of here safely." "Vincent's in the front talking to Tony," Eddie whispered. "They're planning to leave in about 10 minutes. If you can wait that long, I can help you get to your car." "There's something else," Maria said urgently. "They're planning to hunt me down using my family and friends. You're in danger too. Carlucci suspects there might be an informant in Vincent's organization." Eddie was quiet for a moment. "What do we do?" "When this is over, when Vincent and the others are arrested, you're going to need protection. Federal protection. I can arrange that, but you need to be ready to disappear quickly when I give you the signal." "When will that be?" "Tomorrow morning. I'm meeting with federal agents at dawn. By noon tomorrow, this whole operation will be shut down, but Vincent can't suspect anything between now and then." Eddie nodded, though Maria couldn't see him from her hiding spot. "I'll try to act normal." "But Maria, what if something goes wrong? What if they figure out what's happening before the arrests?" "Then you run." "Don't try to be a hero, don't try to warn me. Just disappear and call the number I gave you earlier. The federal agents will protect you." They heard Vincent's voice getting closer as he finished his phone call and began walking toward the back of the restaurant. Eddie quickly moved to the rear door and called out, "All clear back here, Vincent." No signs of anyone snooping around. Vincent appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit now rumpled from the long evening. "Good. Tony's bringing the car around front. We're done here for tonight." Maria held her breath as Vincent walked through the kitchen, passing within 5 feet of her hiding spot. His phone rang again, and she could hear his side of a conversation about surveillance on several locations around the city. They were definitely looking for her, and they were being systematic about it. After Vincent and Eddie left through the front entrance, Maria waited another 10 minutes before emerging from behind the refrigerator. The restaurant was completely dark now, and she could hear cars driving away from the front parking area. The rear alley was empty when Maria finally slipped out of the building. She had parked her car 6 blocks away, and the walk through the dark downtown streets felt endless. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a potential threat. But she made it to her car without incident. And 20 minutes later, she was back at the safe house with the most important evidence ever gathered against Vincent's criminal organization. Sarah was waiting for her with a secure phone connection already established to FBI, Special Agent Catherine Morrison, who had been investigating organized crime connections in the region for the past 2 years. "Agent Morrison, this is Maria Santos. I have approximately 4 hours of recorded conversations between Vincent Romano and Philadelphia crime boss Anthony Carlucci, plus extensive financial records and surveillance files documenting a criminal enterprise that operates in at least 3 states. Agent Morrison's voice was tense with excitement. Ms. Santos, we've been trying to get evidence against Carlucci for 5 years. If your recordings are authentic, they could be the breakthrough we've been waiting for. They're authentic, Maria replied. But we have a time problem. Carlucci left town tonight and Vincent's organization is actively hunting for me. If we don't move quickly, they'll either find me or destroy evidence and scatter. How quickly can you get the recordings to our field office? Maria looked at her watch. It was nearly 2 a.m. I can be there in an hour. Do it. I'm calling in a full task force. If these recordings are as good as you say they are, we'll have arrest warrants ready by dawn. As Maria prepared to leave for the FBI field office, she made one last phone call to Eddie. His phone went straight to voicemail, which worried her. She left a coded message that she hoped he would understand. The delivery you've been waiting for will arrive first thing tomorrow morning. Make sure you're ready to receive it. The drive to the FBI field office felt like the longest hour of Maria's life. She kept checking her mirrors for signs of pursuit, and every set of headlights behind her seemed potentially threatening. But she arrived safely, and Agent Morrison was waiting for her with a team of federal agents and prosecutors. The next few hours were a blur of activity as the FBI team reviewed Maria's evidence, verified its authenticity, and prepared a comprehensive operation to arrest Vincent's entire organization. The recordings were even more valuable than Agent Morrison had hoped. They provided evidence not just of local crimes, but of interstate racketeering, money laundering, corruption of federal officials, and connections to organized crime families in multiple states. This is going to be the biggest organized crime bust in this region in 20 years, Agent Morrison told Maria as dawn approached. Your courage and investigative work have made it possible. But Maria's thoughts were on Eddie, who hadn't returned her calls or messages. She hoped he was safe, and she hoped he would be ready for what was about to happen. At 6 o'clock in the morning, coordinated federal raids began across 3 states. FBI agents, working with local law enforcement agencies, executed simultaneous arrest warrants at over 20 locations connected to Vincent's criminal organization. Maria watched from the FBI field office as teams of agents surrounded the warehouse, where she had been held captive just days earlier. Vincent and Tony were arrested without incident as they arrived for what they thought would be a normal business day. Their faces showed complete shock as they were handcuffed and read their rights. Vincent Romano, you're under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, kidnapping, conspiracy, and interstate transportation of stolen goods, Agent Morrison announced as Vincent was led to a waiting FBI vehicle. The raids yielded more evidence than even the FBI had expected. Vincent's office contained additional financial records, correspondence with corrupt officials, and detailed plans for expanding criminal operations throughout the southeastern United States. Tony's apartment revealed weapons, false identification documents, and surveillance equipment that had been used to monitor targets. But it was the arrest at Romano's kitchen that provided the most surprising discovery. When agents searched the restaurant's basement, they found a hidden room behind the wine storage area that contained extensive surveillance equipment, weapons, and files on dozens of individuals who had been targeted by the organization. Most importantly, they found Eddie. He was tied to a chair in the hidden room, beaten and unconscious. Medical personnel rushed him to the hospital, where doctors determined that he had been tortured for several hours before the FBI arrived. Someone had discovered his cooperation with Maria, and Vincent's organization had tried to extract information about what he had revealed. Maria felt a crushing sense of guilt when she learned about Eddie's condition. This is my fault, she told Agent Morrison. I put him in danger by asking for his help. Eddie made his own choice to cooperate, Agent Morrison replied. And his information, combined with your recordings, is what made these arrests possible. He's a hero, and he's going to survive his injuries. Indeed, Eddie recovered quickly once he received medical treatment. More importantly, his testimony, combined with Maria's evidence, provided federal prosecutors with everything they needed to build comprehensive cases against every member of Vincent's organization. The arrests continued throughout the day as FBI agents tracked down associates and accomplices across the region. By evening, over 30 people had been arrested, including several public officials who had been receiving illegal payments from Vincent's organization. The corruption was more extensive than anyone had realized. The mayor's chief of staff, 2 city council members, a county commissioner, and a state legislator were all arrested on charges related to accepting bribes and manipulating government contracts in favor of Vincent's companies. Anthony Carlucci was arrested at his home in Philadelphia as he was preparing to flee the country. Federal agents found packed suitcases, fake passports, and over $2 million in cash. The recordings of his meeting with Vincent provided evidence of his leadership role in a criminal enterprise that spanned multiple states and involved millions of dollars in illegal activities. Within days, several of Vincent's associates began cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. They provided additional evidence about corruption schemes, money laundering operations, and violent crimes that the organization had committed over the past 5 years. The investigation revealed that Maria had been specifically targeted because her reporting was getting too close to exposing a massive construction fraud scheme. Vincent's organization had been manipulating city planning processes to secure lucrative contracts, then inflating costs and billing the city for work that was never completed or materials that were never delivered. Your investigation into those construction contracts would have eventually uncovered everything, Agent Morrison explained to Maria. That's why they were so desperate to stop you. You were threatening their most profitable operation. Eddie's recovery became a symbol of hope for other potential witnesses. Despite his injuries, he testified before a federal grand jury and provided detailed information about the organization's structure, methods, and crimes. His cooperation helped prosecutors understand how Vincent recruited and controlled people through debt and intimidation. I thought I had no choice, Eddie explained during one of his interviews with prosecutors. Vincent made it seem like working for him was the only way to pay off my gambling debts. But Maria showed me there was another way, even when it seemed impossible. The federal investigation also revealed connections to organized crime families in New York, New Jersey, and Florida. What had started as Maria's investigation into local corruption had uncovered a regional criminal network that had been operating for over a decade. As the investigation expanded, more victims came forward. Business owners who had been extorted, contractors who had been forced to pay kickbacks, and other journalists who had been threatened or intimidated. The scope of the criminal enterprise was staggering, and Maria's courage in fighting back had opened the door for all of them to seek justice. The evidence was so comprehensive that most defendants chose to plead guilty rather than face trial. Vincent Romano was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Tony received 15 years. Carlucci, as the leader of the organization, received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. More importantly, the investigation led to reforms in city government that made it much more difficult for similar corruption schemes to operate in the future. New oversight procedures, transparency requirements, and whistleblower protections were implemented to prevent organized crime from infiltrating government contracts and processes. Maria's newspaper won a Pulitzer Prize for the series of articles she wrote about the investigation and the broader issues of organized crime and corruption. But for Maria, the real victory was knowing that other journalists, business owners, and citizens would be safer because Vincent's organization could no longer threaten and intimidate people with impunity. Eddie entered the Federal Witness Protection Program and relocated to a different state, where he started a new life free from the debts and threats that had controlled him for years. Before he left, he met with Maria one final time. I never thanked you properly, he said. You could have just escaped and tried to forget what happened. Instead, you risked your life to bring them down. That took more courage than I ever had. You found your courage when it mattered most, Maria replied. Without your help, Vincent and Carlucci would still be out there hurting people. The investigation also revealed why Maria had been so specifically targeted. Among Vincent's files, agents found detailed surveillance reports showing that her investigation was much closer to exposing the truth than she had realized. Her reporting had already identified several shell companies and suspicious transactions that were central to their money laundering operation. You were probably less than 2 weeks away from publishing something that would have brought their whole operation down, Agent Morrison told her. That's why they acted so desperately to stop you. 2 years after the arrests, Maria stood in the federal courthouse as the last of Vincent's associates was sentenced to prison. The criminal organization that had once seemed so powerful and untouchable had been completely dismantled. Every member was either in prison cooperating with authorities, or had fled the country. The ripple effects of the investigation continued to spread. Federal authorities used the evidence from Vincent's operation to launch investigations into similar criminal enterprises in other cities. Over 50 additional arrests were made across the eastern United States as the network of corruption and organized crime was systematically exposed and destroyed. Maria had returned to her job at the newspaper, but her work had changed dramatically. She now focused on investigative reporting that exposed corruption and organized crime, and she had become a nationally recognized expert on these issues. Law enforcement agencies regularly consulted with her about ongoing investigations, and she spoke at conferences about the intersection of journalism and public safety. The experience had changed her in profound ways. She was more cautious about her personal security, but also more determined to use her skills and platform to protect others from the kind of threats she had faced. She had learned that criminals relied on fear and isolation to control their victims, and that exposing their methods to public scrutiny was one of the most effective ways to stop them. Eddie had thrived in his new life under federal protection. He had completed college and was working as an accountant for a nonprofit organization that helped other crime victims rebuild their lives. He stayed in touch with Maria through secure communications, and they had developed a lasting friendship based on their shared experience of standing up to dangerous people. "I never thought I was brave enough to fight back against someone like Vincent," Eddie told Maria during one of their phone calls. "But you showed me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they decide they won't be victims anymore." The warehouse where Maria had been held captive was now an FBI training facility where agents learned techniques for investigating organized crime and protecting witnesses. Agent Morrison often used Maria's case as an example of how courage and intelligence could overcome even well-organized criminal enterprises. "The Santos case changed how we approach these investigations," Agent Morrison explained to new FBI recruits. "It showed us that victims can become our most valuable allies if we give them the support and protection they need to fight back." Maria's editor, Sarah, had been promoted to chief investigative reporter, and together they had built one of the most respected investigative journalism programs in the country. Their work had led to reforms in government contracting, improvements in witness protection programs, and new laws that made it easier for journalists to investigate corruption. Without fear of retaliation, the newspaper's circulation had increased dramatically. As readers recognized the value of fearless investigative reporting, other news organizations began following their model, creating specialized teams focused on exposing corruption and organized crime. Maria had inadvertently sparked a revival of investigative journalism that was making it much more difficult for criminal organizations to operate in secret. Vincent Romano remained in federal prison, where he would spend the rest of his life. Occasionally, prosecutors would interview him about other criminal activities, but he had never provided any useful information. His pride and anger prevented him from acknowledging that he had been outmaneuvered by a journalist he had tried to intimidate into silence. Tony had been released after serving 10 years, but he found himself unable to return to criminal activities. The investigation had made him too well known to law enforcement, and other criminal organizations didn't trust him because of how thoroughly Vincent's operation had been exposed. He eventually found legitimate work as a security guard and stayed out of trouble. The restaurant that had been the site of the crucial meeting between Vincent and Carlucci was now owned by Eddie's cousin, who had renamed it Second Chances and turned it into a community gathering place. Maria occasionally ate there when she was in town, and she always sat in the main dining room, rather than the private back room where she had hidden to record the meeting that brought down the criminal organization. The most satisfying outcome for Maria was seeing how the investigation had inspired other victims of crime and corruption to come forward. Over the past 2 years, dozens of people had contacted her newspaper with information about criminal activities, knowing that their stories would be taken seriously and that they would be protected from retaliation. "Your case showed people that it's possible to fight back and win," Sarah told Maria as they worked on their latest investigation. Before this, most people thought organized crime was too powerful to challenge. Now they know that criminals are just people, and people can be defeated if you're smart and brave enough. Maria had written a book about her experience, titled Breaking the Silence: How One Investigation Brought Down a Criminal Empire. The book became a bestseller and was used in journalism schools and law enforcement training programs across the country. She donated most of the proceeds to organizations that supported crime victims and investigative journalism. Looking back on the experience, Maria realized that being kidnapped had been both the most terrifying and most important event of her life. It had taught her that she was stronger and more resourceful than she had ever imagined, and it had given her a mission that went far beyond simply writing newspaper articles. I used to think my job was just to inform people about what was happening in their community, Maria reflected during a speech at a journalism conference. Now I understand that sometimes our job is to actively fight against the forces that threaten our communities. We're not just observers, we're participants in the struggle for justice. The criminal organization that had once seemed so powerful and untouchable was now just a cautionary tale told in law, enforcement training sessions, and journalism schools. Maria Santos, the journalist they had tried to silence, had become a symbol of how individual courage and determination could triumph over organized crime and corruption. The investigation was officially closed, but its impact continued to grow. Every time a journalist exposed corruption, every time a witness found the courage to testify against criminals, every time a community stood up to organized crime, Maria's example provided proof that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary victories against seemingly impossible odds. She had fallen into enemy hands, but instead of becoming their victim, she had systematically destroyed them one by one, using nothing more than her intelligence, courage, and refusal to be intimidated into silence.